What is going on, guys? It's your boy, Paul's Christian Apologetics, and today we've got a special guest. His name is the Lamb Apologetics, or Cam. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, doing good. How you doing?
Doing well. And tell us about your little skerfuffles with the Islamic community and being on Inspiring Philosophy's podcast.
Um, yeah. Well, I know there was the whole issue with like the Than files they brought up, and then I was apparently thrown into that, and then since then I
Wait,
debated.
what's that actually?
Oh,
Is it worth talking about or no?
it's not really worth talking about that much. It was just them just basically talking trash about Than,
Oh, okay.
especially after the whole like dilemmas and stuff that like the poop dilemma and all that. But not to bring that back up because that haunts him. But
Gotcha.
yeah, I debated Muhammad Hijab and brought up the moral incoherency argument and been trying to run that on as many Muslims as I can. Don't really get a lot of pushback from that, really, if at all. And since then, I've been kind of blacklisted,
Oh, yeah?
where they just don't debate me anymore. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Good thing I ended my live in time for this peak content. Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, but if you guys don't know me already, it's your boy Apollo's Christian Apologetics. We do all things related to biblical scholarship, evidence for the existence of God, for the reliability of the New Testament and Old Testament miracles, and so on and so forth. I've got a Rashi Christie at UTSA playlist when I was handling stuff over there. So there's that. We also got a Patreon, and it is true I'm not making any paid content just yet, but as soon as I do get some Patreon donors, I will start making exclusively Patreon only content. For what it's worth, your donations help with keeping uh, the social media persona going, and keeping my time off of like things like work and stuff like that. We also got an Instagram where we're currently live. It looks like it's delayed. And we should also be live on TikTok as well. But yeah, today we're gonna be reviewing a video that Monkey Boy did on one of his lives. So yeah, for context, guys, Monkey Boy debated with Danny Philtalk against me and David Paulman on Modern Day Debates podcast, where we talked about the existence of God, arguing mainly for Christianity as a subset of theism. And I just happened to get one of these requests from my Discord to basically respond to Monkey Boy. So if Monkey Boy, if you're watching this right now, if this feels like an unprompted attack, it's not. Number one, I think you're a good faith interlocutor. But more importantly, I just honestly, it was just like someone wanting here. Let me share my screen here real quick. Wanting me to do a response to you. So that's really all it is. Oh wait, whoops. Stop screen share. Here's my Discord. Entire screen. Yeah, and there it is. Yeah, I know you debated him recently, but maybe you can get more in depth on his argument, and then it links your TikTok video. So before that, really quick, did we have any bro? I don't think the thumbnail is helping you when you say that. It's a different thumbnail. Um, well, I guess like it kind of is a little bit of a heated thumbnail, regardless. But yeah, that's just the nature of how I do things. I always add clickbaity thumbnails, even though I'm really like genuine and try to add the best content, academic content. Some people argue it's like a tonal mismatch, but that's just kind of the way things roll over here in this channel. Turtle GI symbol in the back. I think that's in reference to you, the lamb. I'm not sure. You're muted, by the way.
oh, there we go. Yeah, I don't know.
Gotcha.
Oh, turtle. Okay, turtle. Yeah, he's talking about that.
Oh, okay.
The turtle
Gotcha.
school from yeah, Master Roshi and Dragon Ball.
Gotcha. All right. Any overall thoughts on this TikTok, um, that we've got over here? Um, I will say that he did present it as like one of the best arguments for atheism. So we're gonna be evaluating if that's the truth today. So stay tuned, guys. Share screen. Chrome tab. It's proof for atheism, is what he says. Any thoughts of the Lamb? Any overall thoughts you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think Monkey Boy is probably one of the more intelligent interlocutors on TikTok. I think he's better than some of the ones I've definitely talked to. I've never talked to him personally, but I know people who have, and they typically say he's got some pretty good knowledge. I don't know how like philosophically rigorous he is, but he's at least got some sort of knowledge in epistemology so far as he's explaining like Bayesian reasoning and such.
For sure, for sure. Um, but yeah, I think that he makes some. It's like he said, he's a good faith interlocutor. At least during my interactions with him, sometimes we can get into our own echo chambers and be a little bit smug over there. But I don't think he means any disrespect. Even though he did Loki call me dumb a couple times in his own live, but it's all right. It's all right. You do what you got to do to please your audience. Um, But yeah, in this video in particular, the best argument for atheism, I think that he abuses the principle of indifference. I think that he applies it in areas that it just doesn't work epistemically, and makes several argumentative errors. So that's basically my thoughts, real quick. So let's jump right in, and let me guys know if you guys can. Let me know if you guys can hear the video from Monkey Boy. I'm gonna play it here real quick.
I'm going to go over what I think is actually the strongest argument for atheism. And in fact, the argument's so strong, I think that a priori, as a default without experience in the world, you should just be an atheist. I think atheism is antecedently significantly more likely than theism. I'll explain phrases like antecedent probability and why the general probability of atheism is far more likely by default. I'd love also for any theist or anyone who disagrees to respond to this stitch, make a video responding.
Like us. All right, no sweet, they can hear it.
We're not doing that. Now, this video might be a little long, but bear with me. So first is the a priori antecedent probability. Let's explain what these two things mean. A priori is just what we know with that experience, and antecedent probability is just the probability of the proposition, take any proposition, before introducing any new information. So how likely it is with our background information. So here we're talking about how likely theism versus atheism is without any information entirely. Now, we're going to be assuming a basic...
So real quick, I just wanted to pause, and it seems though right off the bat he doesn't understand the objectivist, subjectivist, Bayesian like debate, because he's treating priors as like metaphysically, before you've calculated any of the evidence. But that's just the vibe I got throughout this one little snippet and throughout the rest of the video. I don't know. What do you think, Lamb?
Yeah, like the priors don't need to like necessarily establish something prior to these like sorts of data, right? Like you can have priors with accounting data and then you add on new data, right? And a lot of the data that's supposed within a hypothesis given the prior, right? Or that supposes a prior could be, due to background commitments, right? And we typically just go on to add new data and to see if it's like going to be an auxiliary scope and accounting for the new data that's going to be presented. So yeah, no, I don't think that like a prior necessitates like no information or prior experience.
For sure. I mean, like according to Bayes' theorem, the new posterior becomes the prior to something else, namely a new set of information, new evidence that you might come across. So I think it's just, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, let's continue.
Indifference principle. There's contentions to this. There's going to be philosophical dispute pretty much revolving around anything. The type of principle I'm assuming here is an indifference principle, which is something very intuitive, which is that if you don't have any information about two competing propositions that are complementary, just meaning they're contrastive, exhaust the possibility space, like John has a dog or John doesn't have a dog. I have no background information whatsoever about the relevant propositions that inform my probability. What we do is when we have the two competing propositions, we assign them roughly equal probability. We'll distribute the probability fairly, so they'll each get 0.5. So you're going to see in this diagram here, what I have is the two pie charts that is the probabilities of atheism and theism antecedently. Now, I just did a random distribution that you can see, which is amongst more specific variations of theism and atheism. There's various atheistic and theistic views, and you'll take some space there. Now, the second thing I want to say is about these probabilities. Ordinarily, what we're doing right now is assuming the probabilities of atheism and theism are roughly equal. So we distribute 50-50. This is a huge mistake. So we know a priori the probability there of minds is 50-50. So let's just say there's a mind, and now let's talk about the specificity. Here we see it's either material or immaterial. Now, between the immaterial and material, we see that there's a division for the immaterial between whether or not it's causally inert or causally efficacious, just meaning it has the power to cause or doesn't have the power to cause. So the proposition that there is an immaterial mind that's causally efficacious is obviously going to be less likely antecedently. Now, another condition that constitutes theism is that theism commits you to that there's a mind that's immaterial, causally efficacious, and immensely powerful. And there's other conditions, obviously, that has innate knowledge.
Yeah, and those conditions don't warrant that kind of partitioning. So let's go ahead and get to the slides. All right, slideshow. Let's see here. Slide. Wait, where's... Oh, there it is. Alright, sweet. So, here's gonna be our analysis on MonkeyBoy's Bayesian blunder. So, yeah, I guess I'll take it away. The indifference principle and the partition problem. Philosophers have noted that indifference over an unprivileged partition yields contradictory probabilities. So, he was talking about how you can describe Christianity or some specific version of theism as a conjunction of different propositions. The problem is you can do literally the same thing with atheism. So yeah, it just the applying the indifference principle to an arbitrary partition doesn't seem really obvious or indifferent, so to speak. So yeah, in the philosophical literature, they kind of discuss this. So in the instance of, the Bertrand's paradox, they basically show the different ways you slice up your probability is going to give, different, principle of indifference probabilities. And intuitively, this makes sense. The different ways you slice up your pizza, means, you're going to get different sizes. So yeah, and then here, let me just go and read a quote here real quick that summarizes exactly what's going on in this slide. So this example is taken from Ted Poston's The Intrinsic Probability of Grand Explanatory Theories in section 4.2, the principle of indifference. And the example kind of goes like this. Suppose you know a car that has traveled 1 mile between 1 to 2 minutes. You know, therefore, that the car traveled somewhere between 30 to 60 miles per hour. By an indifference principle, one may justify the claims, namely, A, that there's a 50% chance the car traveled between 30 to 45 miles per hour, and corresponding 50% chance that the car traveled between 45 miles per hour and 60 miles per hour, and also B, that there is a 50% chance that the car took between 60 to 90 seconds, and correspondingly that the car took between 90 to and 120 seconds. Took between 90 seconds and 120 seconds. And the problem is that A and B are inconsistent. If you're gonna do the principle of indifference for speed, yielding 50% chance for 30 to 45 miles per hour, then the trip would have taken 120 to 80 seconds. And if you were to do the principle of indifference with time first, then you also get contradictory probabilities as well. So the reason why this is relevant is because he's already starting right off the bat, like, not really, like, understanding that you can't just, like, set, like, metaphysical priors from the principle of indifference. So, yeah, that's pretty much what the Bertrand's paradox kind of leads us to conclude. So, any thoughts before I go on? Real quick, the Lamb?
No.
All right, cool. So yeah, imagine that I partition reality as one of the following set, like falling in between one of these categories, theism or atheism. But then suppose I partition atheism under mutually exclusive metaphysics. Only one theory can be true, or explain whatever evidence we say is part of our reality. So under these different metaphysical theories that can also be atheistic include naturalistic physicalism, axiarchism, idealism, neutral monism, pantheism, panpsychism, brute fact pluralism, mathematical Platonist atheism, and so on and so forth. Now, you might say that, well, Monkey Boy doesn't really have to commit to any of these particular strands of atheism. But the problem is that only works for the time being, because once we start to give evidence to motivate Christianity or a specific type of theism or theistic worldview, Monkey Boy has to commit to certain types of atheism to maintain an unmoved posterior probability. So take, for example, miracles. Let's just say Jesus rose from the dead, or evidence pointing to the proposition that Jesus rose from the dead. He's basically forced into a trilemma. He can either contest the miracle evidence. He's probably either going to do one or two, because he definitely doesn't want to do three, where he admits the probability of atheism is actually lowered. But yeah, the second option would be for him to adopt an atheistic worldview that can account for miracles. So maybe think of your awkward metaphysical theories like axiarchism, panpsychism but godless, idealism, brute fact, moral Platonism. Just basically any type of atheism that doesn't include God, but can include some weird metaphysics that allow for supernatural-like events. And the reason why this is relevant is because once we're saying that the probability for namely natural, if you're not going to take the first horn of the trilemma, and you want to maintain the high probability of atheism, then you're going to want to basically adopt like a type of atheism that can account for those sorts of miracles. So because if that doesn't happen, then the probability of the naturalistic atheism kind of lowers, whereas the supernaturalistic atheism, quote unquote, stays intact, and it stays static in its probability. So this is basically the calculation you really have to get into in order for Monkey Boy's thesis to work. Let T be bare / generic theism. C equals Christianity, which entails T or is a subset of T. E equals some piece of evidence, namely the disciples' martyrdom for the resurrection. Standard probability axioms give probability of Christianity is less than or equal to theism, since Christianity entails theism. Probability of Christianity given evidence is less than or equal to probability of theism given evidence. If evidence confirms Christianity, probability of Christianity given evidence is greater than probability of Christianity without the evidence. Then because probability of theism given evidence is greater than or equal to probability of Christianity given evidence, it follows that probability of theism given evidence is greater than or equal to probability of Christianity given evidence greater than the probability of Christianity. So this is just a really interesting way of just saying that for you to say that the probability for atheism is minimally unmoved and possibly even increased even with miracles, interestingly enough, the evidence for miracles, you're going to have to basically argue that that at least the probability of theism and not Christianity is lowered at least by the same compensating amount, which itself requires its own independent argument. But yeah, because at the end of the day, it's like part of like theism as like a broader category. So we're not over here yet. So any thoughts real quick, William?
Yeah, I was going to say for the first slide, I was going to probably explicate a little further. Not the first slide, my fault. I don't know why I'm thinking that. The first one for the miracles, and such when we talked about like how he should take on different forms of atheism or different variants.
Mm.
I think I can explain that because that was an issue I think we brought up earlier, but I don't know if we're there in the video yet. And it was an interesting thing was when he was the partitioning was that atheism was static in a sort of like
Like
univocal
negationist.
sense. Like
Yeah.
there was no differentiations of different particulars or specific understandings of atheism. It seemed to be a universal or univocal sense of atheism, which supposes either a specific or whatever he seems to define as like bare atheism or atheism simpliciter. And I think that's interesting because that isn't done with theism, and it seems like the differentiations are going to be a multitude of different categories of theism, which he differentiates and then gives a specific probability to arbitrarily, and then would claim that this is, of course, going to cause issues, which I think that's going to get a little bit later. But it was just interesting to know that that was the case, and that he does explain that the metaphysical background commitments that are going to give an auxiliary account for the bare atheism is materialism. So that is the assumption, is that atheism equals materialism. So all physical constitutions are going to be the essential or necessary features of reality, in a sense. So, and there's no, like you said, there's no other invocations of metaphysical commitments to any other forms of atheism, like you said, like panpsychism, for example, or some sort of like Neoplatonic understandings of abstract things existing, but there's no like actual being or personal intellectual willfulling being, right? And I think that was sort of a mistake because it doesn't really, like, I don't know if he did it like on purpose, but it doesn't come off as like genuinely conditionalizing, right? Like he doesn't, you're not actually applying this fairly to both of these positions or these paradigms. It's only being applied to theism to propose the issues with the partitioning.
Yeah.
And it doesn't apply to atheism because that is the specific variant.
Yeah, if there's anything I want you guys who are watching the recording to take away from these first set of slides, it's just basically that if evidence is going to be informing our probability for subtypes of theism, then it also has to inform our probability for subtypes of atheism. And likewise the higher, like, broader categories as well. So there's that. Yeah, but we're not here yet in the video, so let's go ahead and continue on the TikTok video. So share this tab. Oh wait, no, not that one. Share this tab. All right, play.
Has innate reasons. Well, in fact, it has reasons and or knowledge, and then the division from that knowledge is innate and additional stuff. So, as we see from this alone, this is actually showing that the antecedent probability of theism is far less likely. Beyond the very obvious visual explanation, this is known as hyperpenalty, sometimes referred to as, which is just the conjunctive inequality. Sometimes conjunctive inequality, rule, penalty, doesn't matter. It's just a basic point in Bayesian probability, which is the type of probability apparatus in use in this argument. Propositions that are neither theorems or tautologies are less than 1, and propositions that are not impossible are greater than 0. So propositions like John has a dog, that proposition is just by necessity, given the axioms of probability, between 1 and 0. It cannot be 1, it cannot be 0. Unless you had an argument, of course, John having a dog is logically impossible, or somehow you could deduce John has a dog from the axioms of logic, or can show that it's a type of tautological sentence, which both are not true. So it's going to have something greater than 0, but less than 1. It's a decimal. Now the thing is, if you have two propositions like these, a conjunction would be the multiplication of decimals. A conjunction in probability is the multiplication of the probabilities. So, abstractly from that, we already know that any more specific hypothesis, given that would be a multiplication of the probabilities of the proposition, which are decimals, would decrease, which is even far more obvious or visually intuitive, given this type of pie chart I've been showing.
Yeah, and this has been refuted by the McGrews already in their literature on conjunctions and Bayesianism. So let's get back over here to our slides here real quick. Any thoughts real quick on just that clip?
I'm trying to remember what the pie chart was again. Let
What's up,
me.
Koopa?
I have it. I have it saved in my files. I'm just gonna go look at it.
Yeah,
'Cause
and
it
I
was a
think you should have presentation permissions.
I just want to see for myself. Okay, so he presented the. Did he present the three? Not the three. The existence of minds in terms of the theism. Was that the?
No, not yet. We're still at in the video. We're still at. Wait. Can you hear the video, by the way?
I can hear the video. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. He's still at the part where he's saying that, oh look, Christianity is this conjunction of propositions.
Okay, here it is. Yeah.
Conjunctions are,
The conjunctions
yeah,
are like immaterial, causal inert, and then immaterial, causal efficacious,
yeah,
or efficaciousness. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So number one, we pointed out how the conjunction kind of like reasoning also applies to atheism as well. So it doesn't help his case. But more importantly, the McGrews, and someone actually pointed this out to me in one of the comments in one of my responses to Brian Blaise, that they actually have a paper talking about the independence of probabilistic independence of certain types of evidence. So basically, Plantinga used to say that probabilities dwindle or decrease as one adds the conjuncts like theism, resurrection, miracles to describe Christianity. So basically, what the McGrews did is say, wait a minute, you're trying to treat like evidence as like static simpliciter, and that's just not how it works because each conjunct comes attached with its own evidence and Bayes factors compounded. So think, for example, the evidence for miracles. We showed that in our earlier sort of like mathematical analysis that it would affect the probability of quote unquote bare generic theism, because at the end of the day, the weighted probability of like a higher category is going to be the weighted average according to Bayes probability of like its disjuncts. So there's that. So as William Lane Craig basically summarizes on one of his Q&A videos on reasonable faith on dwindling probabilities, basically the takeaway is that as the evidence accumulates, the probability of the conjunction of the hypothesis can actually increase. So that's basically that. We're not here yet, but any thoughts on that real quick, Lamb?
No, I think there will be a slide I'll pull up soon once he starts getting into the complexities of these
All right, bet. Oh, snap. Did he
Okay,
freeze for you guys? Hello? Lime, you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, did I like lag out?
Yeah, you lagged out.
I was saying there's a slide I'll bring up. I think it's within the next like minute or two. He's going to talk about it, and I'll talk about one of the issues with what he brought up with the simplicity and complexity aspects. So
For sure. All right, let's continue this.
Since atheism and theism are the negation of each other, and we showed the very tight and narrow probability curve theism takes, it follows, given the two added exhaust the possibility space or the probability space landscape, we know that atheism is the rest of the probability. So the antecedent probability of theism,
And we showed why he can't just simply make that move earlier. So there's that.
compared to atheism, we can see the antecedent probability of atheism is actually significantly likely, far more likely. Now here's a different reason why atheism would be antecedently more likely. Now let's actually assume atheism and theism are equally likely, that neither is antecedently more likely. Now let's consider the fact that atheism is more broad than naturalism. Naturalism is a subset of atheism. Now just to better keep up with me, I'm going to show this entire formula behind me. Now since theism admits of a natural world, theism is the conjunction of natural facts and non-natural facts. Now if we introduce an explanatory theoretic reasoning, what we get now is that theism would actually be less than or equal to naturalism. Now this is in virtue of an evidential principle called the principle of ontological economy, where ceteris paribus, all else held equal, meaning the two facts have equal explanatory force. The one that introduces less existences, types of existing things, is more likely. That's because if the explanatory merit is equal and the fact that there's higher risk involved in adding an additional commitment, the possibility of error is more likely, then it follows that the more minimalistic ontological picture is going to be more likely. First, we're assuming an explanatory parity, and we'll get back to that later. This is just how you express the explanatory parity in Bayes' theorem, like ceteris paribus, all else held equal. So now what we get is if explanatorily paradigmatic, and theism admits of natural kinds and has the additional commitment of unique sui generis existences, supernatural kinds, namely. What you get is that the theistic explanation violates the principle of ontological economy, so it would actually be less than naturalism. And given naturalism is this assumption of atheism, then we get is atheism is actually more likely than naturalism. So atheism wins. Now, another one is just going to be naturalism is equal to supernaturalism. Theism is a more narrow space in supernaturalism, therefore, and then the rest of the probability goes to atheism, so atheism wins. So I've explained for several reasons why atheism's antecedent probability is quite large.
Okay.
Testing.
Yep.
All right, there it is.
Yeah, so it'll be, if you want to go over yours first on the outcomes, you can, and then we can go to my slides, which I think are 15 or 16. We can talk about some of the things he said.
Yeah, for sure. I would dispute the ceteris paribus clause when it comes to, and I think he talks about it later in his TikTok video about how, there's one more, like, ontological entity, within the, theistic paradigm. I think he actually talks about it a little bit over here just a couple seconds ago when he says theism is a conjunction of natural and supernatural facts, or non-natural facts. So the problem is we basically have to understand that Occam's razor, at the end of the day, at its most fundamental level, should distinguish qualitative parsimony. And philosophers like Schaeffer have talked about this. So, like, we can reframe this in terms of, like, theism. Say, for example, like, positing one necessary being grounding many contingent things scores higher on qualitative parsimony at the fundamental level than positing a brute infinity of contingent physical facts. I mean, yes, sure, the actual facts are the same, but at least in the case of theism, all those facts, the natural facts, are grounded on just one necessary being. So you don't have, like, this bruteness just, like, kind of like hovering over you, casting doubt on your theory. But you said you wanted to go to your slide. Was that towards the end?
Yeah, they're 15 and 16. I just put them at the end, but they address these points. So this is 15. So 15 is just saying, let me get this down. That's my Word document.
Let me just see real quick. Yeah, this is 15.
Yeah. So this is about the issues with the complexity and sort of like problems with holding multiple commitments or more commitments in atheism. Therefore, atheism is more simple in accounting for the data. The issue is you can introduce something like the Kolmogorov simplicity, right? Because the claim is going to be hypothesis 1, which is theism, versus hypothesis 2, atheism. Hypothesis 1 is more complex, therefore hypothesis 1 would be less parsimonious or have a lower prior than the probability of hypothesis 2. But the complexities being explained through the Kolmogorov simplicities are going to explain that a hypothesis can be simple given its account for the data, account for data concisely. So it's not necessarily an issue of whether or not there is these sorts of like multiple conditions or facts at hand in which something is going to be seen as like more complex. That's a problem, right? Because theists would say that God is compressing the explanations, i.e. the conditions are unified under one principle, i.e. God, right? And we would say all things from the physical constitutions to the non-physical immaterial constitutions relegating to specific theories of mind, any sort of like immaterial sense would be compressed to being a single unifying thing or principle, God. For example, a good model of simplicity can be that and there is 30 facts but are uniformly flowing from a single principle or rule, where oppositionally, a bad model could just be there are 30 facts. The issue is there's no accounting for these things in a unified way, which we could kind of flip this onto atheism, and we could claim that atheism is filled with a bunch of different brute facts, and these facts are going to just be independent variables of reality, such as the laws of physics. There's going to be other sorts of contingencies and thereon and so forth, and they would have multiple different forms of explanation, whereas the theist approach would have a unified one. There's just one, and that's God. So in that sense, it could actually be simpler. There's no problem with that. We can go on to the next slide. On to the ontological economy issue. The claim is that theism sort of violates ontological economy by claiming that the probability for hypothesis one would be lower due to the multiple entities and new categories that are introduced. But what we know is the posterior accounting for fit data and the complexity penalties are going to be something that's pretty sufficient. So, for example, and that's a Bayesian model comparison because the explanatory power is equal. The penalties only apply that he had spoken of if the explanatory power is equal. So, for example, if theism can explain with the data, like something like fine-tuning consciousness, certain moral domains, then these are going to be, even though the complexity is introduced there with some of the maybe background commitments of the metaphysical conceptualizations of what God is, if they can account for this data, and it has better auxiliary scope than atheism, the complexity is therefore justified. That's not a problem. And God reduces the number of independent assumptions even if it adds an entity. So the addition of an entity or a category, say that there's an entity that has person, apprehension of intellect and order to will, and is actively causal, intervening, and so on and so forth as a new category as opposed to a brute fact. Again, these independent assumptions are going to be relegated to the fact that that's all unified in its explanation, so there's not really much issue with that. And atheism treats features of reality as independent constants and conditionals. So, like I said earlier, we can sort of flip this on atheism, and we would just say, because of the fact that atheism has this sort of presupposition of how independent constants, conditionals, and facts are going to be handled in terms of its explanatory scope, we would see that they're not really uniformed as the explanation of theism is, that there's a God. Something I laid out here is a common cause model. So God acts as the common cause of the many features in the datum. So it's understandable to say that God could be, again, in addition, in terms of the sorts of entities or categories. But if these sorts of things that we're accounting for, the datum at hand, again, like fine tuning and such, if God is that sort of common cause, whereas atheism is not, because, again, multiple brute facts, then we can say that this will give us more auxiliary explanations.
For sure. And not to get ahead of ourselves just too much, but we also talk about divine simplicity because, especially if you're within the likes of like Imago Logos, or I believe the line we hold to divine simplicity. Do you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like the thing is, if divine simplicity is true, then the attributes of God, the quote unquote conjuncts, are not independent. They are mutually entailing or constitutive. So basically, that means your omni attributes, necessity, immateriality. They're not parts to be subsumed, but aspects of a single perfection, which kind of fits snugly into the Thomistic tradition. Whenever they say that you can only predicate these attributes analogically to God. So because at the end of the day, you're just predicating like one simple, like infinite omni-attribute, which is compressed through one unifying explanation. So this is just a little descriptor I have over here. I use Notebook LM to generate the image, but yeah. This basically kind of describes what I was getting at in terms of the unification of divine simplicity. Okay. We should get to this part. So let's stop sharing this and go back to the video.
Compared to theism on multiple accounts. In fact, the conjunction of all the three reasons shows to you, in fact, that your default an atheist. Atheism is actually not only more likely a priori, but significantly so. Now, let's talk about another issue. Now, philosophers like Paul Draper talk about a basic probability constraint. Given any amount of evidence for the more specific archetype, the more generic archetype or bare minimalistic variation is going to be more likely because there's still going to be partitioning possibilities that take some probability greater than zero. In the generic space, it's just going to be the addition of all the other propositions probabilities along the more specific, so it would be trivially more likely. So what happens is this. Look at the top. You see that we have the probabilities of atheism and theism. As we can see, we're distributing probabilities equally amongst different variations of them. So now let's just focus on theism. Just put some arbitrary place-holding distribution that there's 10 possibilities, so we put the same values. Now what happens is if you have some evidence for one of the propositions that are within theism, and that evidence doesn't independently motivate bare theism, then the probability just does this. You see, the probability of theism remains static, while a particular partitioning probability becomes greater in its alternatives. This is known as eliminative induction. You can think of the probability as a reservoir of probability, and you're just taking from some of the probabilities of others to redistribute and give to this particular space. What happens is this is something commonly known as a type of auxiliary problem. What this auxiliary problem is that the antecedent probability of a more specific theism, say Christian theism, is going to be incredibly less likely given all its additional propositions. If you imagine aseity, each individual historical claim, each individual miraculous claim, propositions like there's going to be a second coming, maybe Trinity, unity, and whatever else. So what happens is, at the cost of those commitments, you generate expectations, unique expectations. So what you're getting is you're getting evidence for that particular variation of theism and not for theism simpliciter.
I just thought I pause over there for effect, just to show how that kind of reasoning has already been thoroughly debunked. There's no such thing as, especially if Christianity is a subset of theism, that you can have evidence for Christianity and not evidence in any way whatsoever, shape, or form for theism. He talks a little bit about Paul Draper. So my reading of Paul Draper doesn't show that. So Draper does argue that some specific evidence, like for instance, like the problem of evil, like Christian doctrines, may not strongly raise the probability of bare theism if Christianity's specific auxiliaries do the work. But this is not saying it's because like the probabilities are like wholly disconnected. On the contrary, he's leveraging that off of his evidential arguments from evil and from pain and pleasure are pitched precisely as raising the relative likelihood of source physicalism over theism. And so, like I was saying before, like with the McGrews showing that the evidence is going to apply cross hypotheses, this is the kind of thing that Paul Draper presupposes. So my reading of Paul Draper does not show that. Have you read a little bit with Paul Draper, The Lamb? You're muted, by the way.
Oh, I muted my mic. Okay, there. No, I haven't read that book, or is it a paper that he wrote?
It's his The Skeptical Theist.
No, I haven't read that one.
And also God or Blind Nature in 2007. But yeah, we should probably, I'm still waiting for him to get into the minds. So hopefully he brings that up soon. We've got like what, 3 more
I often
minutes?
see atheists priding themselves.
I'm gonna go over
Dang it.
he's done miracle claims, historical stuff, maybe proving there's a flood, there's a flat earth, whatever the nonsense is. If all of these claims were putatively true, then Christian theism is still less likely than theism generally. So you have more reason to be a Christian theist than a non-Christian theist, but you don't have reason to be a theist over an atheist. And if the antecedent probability of theism versus atheism from the onset strongly favors atheism.
Another issue is his sort of like categorization of what bare theism is versus Christian theism specifically as a variant is like that sort of branch of categorization, and then how he seems to differentiate the evidence as being only auxiliary towards Christian theism, but not what is it called, bare theism, because I fail to see how, for example, if miracle claims are going to be something that's given as a set of datum in which we are going to claim as auxiliary for Christian theism, it should be equally applicable in categorization for something like bare theism. What's up, modern atheism? And the problem is, because it's going to be antithetical to the materialistic atheist paradigm. And there's in the bare theism, however he may, I don't think he's even defined that. I don't think he defined it in the video, because how we typically understand theism, if he just means bare theism is just a typical definition, is going to be a ultimate creator or subject that is actively intervening, is personal, has intelligence, will, and so on and so forth. If a miracle occurs, a miracle can occur because there's an active intervention or superseding of the immaterial upon the material. Not to say it breaks laws of physics per se, because we understand miracles can also actively engage with the material world. That's why, like, substance dualism is equally going to explain a lot of things that he talks about in the video. And Roy's running from me, Justice. Okay, Roy and external. But yeah, they're equally explanatory. Idealism's equally explanatory. Like, for example, I hold the dual aspect monism. So I would say that the material and immaterial are all going to play in an asexual sense. So I believe that they can actually sort of intercede and supersede upon each other. So when he's explaining this as it only being auxiliary for a specific variation, I have to see an argument for why that's the case, like why the evidence cannot be attributed to bare theism, because the evidence is ultimately going to sort of reduce to there is an immaterial sense of reality that's occurring that's antithetical to materialism. So that would just necessarily follow into the bare theism that he has.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to point out real quick. Even if we were to say that, at least entailment level speaking, like the direct inference, even if it were the case that the evidence doesn't connect like as an inference to theism, because theism is the weighted average of the different subtypes of theism, then it's going to be affected. The probability is going to be affected at the end of the day. So
yeah, and I guess I suppose that an argument he may make, especially about what I just said, is that like miracles may not be auxiliary given if there is a specific paradigm of like materialism, atheism, then they're just going to be unexplained natural phenomenon, right? And but I still think that the issue is it's still not it's still not going to be as explanatory as theism, because theism's background commitments and it's just paradigm specifically is going to account for that way more than atheism just saying
it's
nature of the gaps
counterfactuals, why specifically this time in history, versus just like popping all over the place, so on and so forth. But 100%.
Theism and atheism obviously still wins off. So from the onset, if you assume that theism and atheism are equally likely, which would be a mistake given what was already explained, and how atheism is actually trivially more likely antecedently a priori, what we get then is, given any evidence for Christianity or any more specific archetype of theism that doesn't independently motivate the bare hypothesis, theism is not going to be motivated. So you would actually be irrational for not being indifferent to the proposition of atheism or theism. You would actually have to be agnostic. But that's not true. As explained, you actually would have to be atheist. So this just becomes a question of priors. What's the prior probability of theism given some information? Is there any information that increases its priors? I don't believe that there's any particular evidences for bare theism. Now, I'm not close to that type of project, but I've never been presented evidence that is explicitly evidence for bare theism. But here's the issue. With all that I've already given in favor of atheism, there is information that does antecedently dismotivate, aka motivate, atheism. It's a type of basic inductive inference, and not a more controversial one like a numeric.
I just want to address this comment real quick by Juan from Modern Atheism. He basically asked, does this argument work? The prior probability for a miracle is very low because it has to be divided among all possible miracles God could have done. One, you have to, like we explained earlier in the video, you have to privilege that principle of indifference amongst the various types of possible miracle claims. You have to explain why they are symmetrical in terms of how they look from the onset, which kind of gets into the evidence for each of them. So if it is the case that evidence motivates one miracle over another, then you can't just equally divide them on a principle of indifference. I meant the prior for a particular miracle.
What is this? Is this in relation to what I brought up with, or are you just saying this generally? Because I was gonna say any sort of evidence of miracles, like I said, are just antithetical to the presupposed view that MonkeyBoy is holding on what atheism is, which he holds to. In reality, a very specific variation, but at least as proposed in this video, this is his universal understanding of bare atheism. And I think miracles aren't something that's accounted generally. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of weird because you're kind of trying to trying to map out, partition the probability space that way, when it doesn't seem so obvious, especially when we do have the data that we do have. I think James Fodor and Digital Gnosis made this argument, but I'm not sure it works. Yeah. I mean, if you want to argue for a low prior, I wouldn't do it by saying that God could have done a million other things. I would argue from the fact that perhaps you have naturalistic explanations for the resurrection. Perhaps the evidence for the resurrection is contested. Things like that, as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, here's your principle of indifference across all the possible actions God could have taken, when we do have the evidence of something that occurred, whether you want to say that's the resurrection or not. So hopefully that helps one.
Induction. We could just use predictive induction, right? So imagine we have the proposition, all minds are tightly correlated with neurological states. And of course, theism is the type of, is involving an agent where its phenomenal states are not tied with neurological states. So if we have the proposition that all agents, phenomenal states are tightly correlated with neurological states, again, we would distribute antecedently a priori equal probabilities. What we do have is information that all known minds, phenomenal states, do tightly correlate with neurological states. So with each mind that we find that its phenomenal states tightly correlate with neurological states, the posterior probability, or the probability update on that information, would make that proposition more likely, which would make theism in turn less likely. So that's
okay. Yeah, he's bringing up minds, so let's share this right now. Yeah, all minds are tightly correlated with neurological states. Anything you want to say on that real quick?
All minds are tightly correlated with neurological states. It really depends. I could even grant that, and the issue is, like I brought up earlier, this doesn't really get out of substance dualism or dual aspectual monism, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a basic reference class problem, pretty much. Why should that be predictive against the ontological grounding of the universe? But yeah, low-key it feels excuse me, an attempt to invert the hard problem of consciousness from naturalism to, sorry, I misspoke over there, from atheism to theism. Yeah, I don't know why I wrote that. But anyway, that's what I meant on the slides. Theism predicts that ultimate reality is mind-like and that derived minds will be possible. Naturalism predicts a universe of pure third-person quantities in which qualia ought not to arise, or at the very least, it's not necessarily entailed. Whereas substance dualism does account for qualia, though. So there's that. We went over Paul Draper. We went over divine simplicity. Yeah, we can finish up the rest of this video. So let's go ahead and do that. I just realized I'm not sharing the video. Here it is.
Generically, or evidence against generic theism. There's a whole list I really have of informations that independently motivate bare atheism, if you want to call that just atheism. I guess it's more easier to say dismotivates bare theism. So there's way too much information that is going against theism. At this point, I don't know what can make you not an atheist. I mean, it's 2026. 80% of philosophers are atheists, and I expect in the next 10 years that it would actually jump to 90. At least that's my prediction. And it's just everything is just showing theism. It's just not the case. I mean, come on. I'll repeat this. I want people to stitch. Anyone who's watching has watched the
Alright, that's the end of his video. So let's close this out. So share this tab instead. So some other overall thoughts I have. Like I was saying at the beginning of this video, he doesn't really seem to understand the subjectivist versus objectivist Bayesian debate. Like, the principle of indifference is not a way to metaphysically ground priors as frequencies. I think he's referring to the 2020 Phil Paper survey, in terms of what do philosophers believe to get that 80% number. So yes, it's true, the generalist survey aggregates, like, not just like philosophers of religion, just they also count for people like ethicists or logicians or aestheticians who have, by their own admission, insufficiently familiar with the evidence with philosophers of religion. And IP has done like a great series showing why you can have some explanation for why, say for example, more Christians go into helping, quote unquote, job titles, or helping ministries, or helping job functions like medicine or engineering, or things like that. So yeah, the problem also is that once you narrow it down to philosophers of religion specifically, the figure actually becomes inverted. So 70 to 72% of philosophers of religion identify as theists, and according to Swinburne, he says, like, I think it was like 1% of philosophers were atheistic, and now it has jumped like far above that. I'm sorry, 1% of philosophers were theistic, and then it's now like at 20%. So if anything, it's jumping in the direction in favor of theism. But I think after that we just have your slides, on Kolmogorov and complexity, on ontological economy. So yeah, that's our review of Monkey Boy. Stop sharing this. Yeah, like I said, like, Monkey Boy is pretty cool. I know he can get a little bit snarky when it comes to like saying, oh yeah, that dumb guy debated or whatever, but you got to do what you got to do to get clicks. So I won't take it to heart. As far as like the arguments go, I think he's been thoroughly refuted, I'm not gonna lie, when it comes to his understanding of evidence on how it's supposed to motivate like one group of hypotheses and not another group of hypotheses. I mean, like, the problem is that, as a good Bayesian, you're supposed to update on total evidence, not like be literally blindsided to evidence that supports one side, and just like close your eyes and say, oh yeah, atheism is just the negation of theism or whatever. But yeah, yeah, that's basically the video. So yeah, it's Apollo's Christian Apologetics. I'm an apologetics. I describe myself as an apologetics research channel. So, oh shoot, I'm not even sharing my screen. But yeah, anyway, I don't have to share my screen. You guys know my socials. I'll have it in the description. OJ Simpin, Lamb and Apollos on the same stream. This is the biggest crossover since pee and poop. Okay, bud. But yeah, anything you wanted to say on that note, the Lamb? Here, let me plug in your socials real quick while you're speaking.
Yeah, I would actually shout out Monkey Boy, and I would say that if people are interested in his content, you should definitely go over to his TikTok and follow him. I think he streams like every day. I don't know. I don't follow him, but I know like he pops up on my feed a lot, and I think he streams like every day or at least a lot. And if you're interested in watching people argue about theism versus atheism, um, he hosts a lot of debates. So I think it would be pretty edifying for people to go to his channel and look. And it's always good to go to an opposition to see what their positions are and to see whether or not they can actually reconcile some of the problems or give good accounts for things in their position. So I would definitely go check him out. Yeah, for the video overall, yeah, I think some of the sort of applications of the Bayesian epistemology were a little weird, especially given like the sort of ontological economy one, where the Occam's razor is being implied. In Bayesian epistemology, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And for example, with the common cause model that I gave, the common cause model also was supposed to sort of elucidate on the fact that you need new information in conditionalizing, right? And you need to update. And that's how these sorts of accounts are actually going to be debated. I don't think I put it in there. I didn't, but I had written out something in my notes. I don't know if I have it, but it was talking about like what you would actually be debating, and that was introducing fit data, right, into the theism versus atheisms. Like the bare bone. I'm sorry, my nose, like my congestion's pretty bad, so if my voice like fluctuates. But yeah, the bare bones, the bare theism, atheism sort of oppositions. You have to introduce that sort of new evidence to update whether or not one would be over the other and it's like posterior. The antecedent stuff, I don't think really cashes out that well given the evidence. And again, like the issues with supposing what I believe he kind of accounts bare theism as being like a sort of deism in a way. And what else? Yeah, and the complexity to simplicity issues, I think that was a little bit more nuanced, and it's not as simple as just saying something has a bunch of facts, but because they have a bunch of facts, or they introduce an entity or a category, therefore the complexity relegates it to being not the simplest explanation or more parsimonious. And yeah, I guess that's like the general overview. But as for my channel, yeah, Lim Apologetics, you can go check me out. I don't think I made a video in like a week, maybe 2 weeks, but yeah, 2 weeks. I will be coming out with a video shortly. I'm working on a few things, so I'm working on a video called Why the Argument of Miracles is Stronger Than You Think. I think that is an extremely slept on argument. I think that it has a lot of metaphysical implications that will show that theism is extremely powerful. I will be making a video about why Justin Martyr is a pretty staunch Trinitarian, given you conditionalize on the sort of cognitive aspects of the language being used by early church fathers. And I'm still currently writing my paper on the phenomenological reconciliation of the triune God, but I will make an introductory video on that paper, and I will explain my phenomenological Trinitarian model and how I believe that it's pretty well explanatory, and that it it upholds orthodoxy. And so it holds essential doctrine without doing like anything heretical.
For
So
sure.
be on the lookout for that.
Yeah. And as for me, as you guys know, we're doing like a whole series on Dan McClellan and his book The Bible Says So with me and a bunch of collaborators. The latest release was his claims regarding the alphabet and how it somehow like puts like this chronological barrier for dating the Torah, which is like, in my opinion, very highly mistaken. So there's that. I'm also giving a presentation on the Christian Apologetics Network on the various types of heresies and why none of them are apostolic and fail the evidence, to where the cognitive model for the Trinity definitely surpasses support in terms of like broad agreement by the Church Fathers by far. Other than that, that's pretty much all I'm working on. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. And is there anything final you wanted to say right before we leave the Lamb?
Yeah. Yeah, subscribe.
Yeah.
Keep on the lookout. I don't like be good in terms of your theology. I know there's a lot of things that are occurring in terms of Christianity. I think it's good to note that we should all just meditate, pray, and read scripture. So and go to church.
Yeah. All right. You guys heard it here from the Lamb Apologetics. Boys, we'll see you out soon. You made it to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider becoming a Patreon member for Apollo's Christian Apologetics. Your partnership helps with creating original Christian apologetics research, gets you exclusive access to videos, and more. Want to catch me personally online? Well, feel free to join our Discord server. But in any case, Christianity is true, apologetics is base. This is your boy Apollo signing out. Peace.